This is part 56 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. Please watch part 55 before proceeding. We'll be working with the same example that we started in part 55. In this video, we'll discuss preventing cross-site scripting attack while allowing only the HTML that we want to accept. For example, we only want to accept bold and underline tags. If you recollect from the previous session, we want the users to be able to submit their feedback, and while they are doing that, we want them to be able to stress certain words using bold and underline tags. So we want the users to be able to submit HTML, but at the same time, we want to prevent cross-site scripting attack from happening. So to achieve that, there are three simple steps. The first step is to disable input validation so that the end users can submit HTML. Since we want the users to be able to submit HTML, we want to disable input validation, and that's the reason why we have decorated this create controller action method with this validate input attribute, and we are passing false. So we don't want to validate input. So whatever input that is coming from this view, create view. So when I click on this create button, this is the controller action method that responds. So whatever input that is coming from that form, don't validate that. Okay. So since we are not validating the input that is coming from this form, now the users will not only be able to submit bold and underline tags, they will be able to submit any HTML tags they want. They can even inject JavaScript like this. Okay. So the next step is to dynamically encode all the input that is coming from the user. Okay, so when I click on this create button, whatever input that we have here, that input is going to be received by this controller action method. Notice that here we are receiving a comment object, and this comment object has got name and comments property. So name property is going to receive the input that's coming from this text box. Comments property is going to receive the input that is coming from this text box. So we want to HTML encode all the input that is coming into this controller action method. And how do we do that? We are making use of string builder class for that. Now you might be wondering, why are we using string builder class? Why can't we simply use system.string class? That's because of performance. Because we are going to modify a given string multiple times. Okay, and when we change the same string several times, it's better to use string builder over string class. That's because strings of type system.string are immutable. So if you change them several times for performance reasons, since strings of type system.string are immutable, it's better to use string builder, because strings of type string builder are mutable. No matter how many times you change them, there's not going to be any performance impact if you are using string builder. So that's why it's better to use string builder, and that's the reason we are using it here. Okay, so we are creating an instance of string builder class, and notice what we are doing here. Whatever that is present in the comments property, so obviously this user input will be present in the comments property of the comment object. So we are taking the user input out and then passing it to this HTML encode method of a HTTP utility class. That's a static method. So we are calling it in the name of the class. So this method is actually going to HTML encode the user input. So it's going to HTML encode all this input. Okay, both of these bold and underline tags, the script tag, and this closing script tag as well. Okay. So once we have that HTML encode, we are then storing that in the string builder object. Okay, so at this point, we have all the input from the user HTML encoded. But what is our requirement? We want to allow bold and underline tags. So the next step is to selectively replace the encoded HTML with the HTML elements that we want to allow. What are the HTML elements that we want to allow? Bold and underline. Okay, so this is the encoded HTML for bold tag. So ampersand LT semicolon. LT stands for less than, GT stands for greater than. So ampersand LT semicolon, that is the encoded string for less than symbol. Similarly, ampersand GT semicolon is the encoded string for greater than. And then in between we have that letter B, which stands for the bold tag. So replace that encoded HTML with this HTML tag. And this one is for the closing tag, so replace that with the closing bold tag, underline, closing underline. So once we have the HTML elements that we want to allow, so here we have them. Next, what we are doing, we are setting that back as the value for the comments property of the comment object after converting it into the string representation, because comments property is of type string, so we are converting that to string. Okay, now notice this second set of code that we have here. We are HTML encoding the user input for name as well. So name is coming from this text box. We're not expecting the end user to submit HTML within this text box. Okay, so that is not stopping the end user from, that is not stopping the hacker from injecting HTML and JavaScript. Okay, so to prevent cross-site scripting attack using this text box, it is better to HTML encode the input that is coming as part of the name property as well. Okay, so we are taking whatever that is present in the name property, HTML encoding that, storing in this variable, and then setting that as the value for the name property on the comment object. Finally, we hand that comment object to this DB context object, which is going to save that to the database. Okay, so by this point we have all HTML encoded except bold and underline tag. So we are allowing the users to be able to submit bold and underline tags, and at the same time we are preventing cross-site scripting attack. Let's actually look at that in action. And this string builder class is present in system.text namespace. So let's go ahead and import that namespace first. And within the controller action method, let's go ahead and create a string builder object. And so this is the comment object which is going to receive comments and name from the UI. So we have the comments property. We want to HTML encode that using HTTP utility class, which has got the static method HTML encode. So look at the return type, it's returning a string, which is nothing but the encoded string. And then we want to store that in the string builder object, and to do that we are going to make use of append method of the string builder object. So that's going to append the encoded string to the string builder object. Okay, so at this point we have all HTML encoded. We want to selectively replace the encoded HTML with the HTML elements that we want to allow, that is the bold and underline tag. So sp comments dot replace, we want to replace ampersand less than semicolon. That is those are the encoded characters for less than symbol, and then the bold tag, and then we have ampersand gt semicolon. Okay, so we want to replace them with a bold tag. Oops, let's put that in the double quotes. Similarly, we want to replace the closing bold tag, underline tag, and closing underline tag. So that's going to be closing bold tag, and here we need a closing bold tag. This is going to be an underline tag, and this is going to be a closing underline tag. Finally, convert the string builder object to string, and then assign that as the value for the comments property on the comment object. Now the next step is to HTML encode whatever is present in the name property. So comment.name, use the HTTP utility class and use the HTML encode method and encode that. Store that in a variable of type string, str, let's call this name, and finally set that as the value for the name property on the comment object. Okay, so now the comment object is then persisted to the database, and we redirect the user to the index view. Alright, let's build the solution. So build succeeded. Now let's click on create. So now this is going to submit this comment to the database. Now except the bold and underline tag. Notice that except the bold and underline tag, look at the word very good. That's bolded and underlined. But look at the script. The script didn't execute. Instead, it has encoded that script tag and then stored in the database. And then when the form is displayed, look at that, when the form is displayed, the encoded HTML is displayed instead of executing that script. So if you look at what we have in the database, so let me execute that query. Notice that the bold and underline tag, they are stored as we want them to be stored, whereas the script tag is HTML encoded. Okay, so here we have allowed the HTML that we want to allow, in this case the bold and underline tags, but we have prevented cross-site scripting attack as well. Now I must tell you, relying on just filtering the user input. So here what are we doing? We are filtering the user input. Okay, basically we are encoding all the HTML and we are allowing only the HTML that we want to allow. So there's nothing but filtering the user input. So this technique alone cannot guarantee cross-site scripting attack elimination. Cross-site scripting attack can happen in different ways and in different forms. This is just one example that we have discussed today. Now please read MSDN documentation on cross-site scripting attack and all the countermeasures that are available. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.